said that they had found the flying saucer. That's a bunch of horse bucky. That's a weather balloon.
Washington said, cover this up.
Don't ever talk about this again.
What did crash at Roswell ultimately was the truth.
Eyewitnesses, believers, skeptics, and a top-secret military operation recreated in a first-ever experiment.
We know an alien flying saucer was recovered. There were bodies found. There was a major cover-up.
What really happened outside Roswell, New Mexico? Find out as we examine the best evidence. Roswell, New Mexico. For many people, the name is synonymous with a crashed flying saucer and an unusual government cover-up. 6 decades after the mysterious event, eyewitnesses continue to stick to their stories.
I do think it was a craft of some kind. It was not of human manufacture. Where it came from, I don't know, but I do know it did not come from Earth.
What fell out of the sky that summer is still shrouded in mystery.
Whatever it was that they really found so unsettled them that there seems to have been a panic.
This much is clear. The quiet New Mexican town was changed forever when on July 8, 1947, word of a flying saucer crash hit the news. But in only 4 hours, the story was suddenly recanted. What shocked the public almost more than the initial announcement was it now was being denied by the same official sources who'd released it in the first place. Today, the Roswell incident lives on in the public imagination. But it began as America was coming of age in a frightening new era. It was the aftermath of World War II and a period of heightened fear of invasion. Powerful weapons could wipe away cities in a single devastating moment. 1947 was the year the CIA was formed. Americans everywhere feared Russian sympathizers and infiltrators.
Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
It was the beginning of the Cold War, and spying on the enemy became an essential tactic. Coincidentally, throughout the late 1940s, there were also many sightings of what came to be referred to as flying saucers.
It's falling! It's falling towards the Earth!
And so the stage was set for a small American town to become the touchstone for a UFO conspiracy. It was while working on a farm outside Roswell that rancher Mac Brazel discovered some unusual wreckage. He didn't think much of it, but when he heard stories of UFO sightings, he decided to report it to the authorities. The Roswell Army Air Base sent out its top intelligence officer. Major Jesse Marcel was attached to an elite unit, the 509th, the world's first nuclear bomber squadron.
What makes the Roswell story so different for me than other UFO stories is that I saw it. I saw it firsthand.
Jesse Marcel Jr. remembers the night his father woke him up to see something he claimed was out of this world.
When he came home that night and he woke myself and my mother up to come and look and see what he found, or at least what he retrieved from a crash site on this ranch out of Roswell. He said, I think it's part of a flying saucer. Now look very carefully at this because you probably will never see this again. And he was right.
The crash debris was described as containing unusual materials. It was removed by the Air Force.
The military press release stated that through the cooperation of a rancher outside town, the Roswell Army Airfield had recovered the wreckage of a flying saucer. So it was headline news.
Stanton Friedman is a former nuclear physicist who has spent many years researching the Roswell incident.
Look at the evidence and you'll be convinced. There's no question in my mind that there's been a cover-up of the Roswell incident, an official government-sponsored cover-up, if you want to put it that way.
Within hours of releasing the UFO story, the military withdrew it, stating it was only a crashed weather balloon. Scientists have been using latex balloons since they were first developed in 1940. Weather balloons carry disposable instruments that take atmospheric measurements and relay the information back to Earth by radio.
Sorry, gentlemen, we made a mistake. It was not a flying saucer, just a radar reflector weather balloon combination. So within a 4-hour period, you went from Army recovers flying saucer to just a weather balloon.
To further compound the mystery, the Air Force flew the supposedly ordinary debris to Fort Worth, Texas for further study.
They really realized that they had something very strange here, very exotic. And that's when they wanted to kill the story as soon as possible.
Retired commercial pilot Robert Durant has been investigating Roswell for close to 20 years.
There's a big lie that's going on here and has been going on since 1947. The outgoing message traffic from Roswell Army Airfield was missing. And the records of the military police unit, which everybody says cleaned up the crash and protected it, also missing. So that made me and a lot of other people suddenly get suspicious. They are covering this up, and they switched this stuff with the balloon and just hoped and prayed they could pull it off.
If the military was reporting the recovered debris was from a crashed radar reflector weather balloon, then the proof should come from the physical evidence itself.
It had physical properties that just didn't match anything that human beings were making at the time. I definitely believe there was a cover-up.
David Rudiak has been studying the Roswell incident for over 10 years. He believes rancher Mac Brazel wasn't mistaken with what he had found.
Brazel had done this interview saying, I found weather balloons in my property, but this wasn't like any of them, and it wasn't any weather observation device.
Actually, Mac Brazel was quite familiar with weather balloons because he'd seen them before. My dad went to radar school, so he knew what a radar target looked like.
Back in 1947, radar reflector targets were coated with foil that was available commercially. Believers maintain both Jesse Marcel and Mac Brazel would have recognized this and other common materials used in the weather balloon.
Okay, I went out to the local grocery store and got this chocolate bar, and this particular company was wrapping its chocolate bars in foil paper for about 30 years before Roswell. And this is what they made the radar targets from. I'm sure they would have been pretty familiar with this stuff.
We all came to the conclusion this was something that was very exotic, that this is probably not a human manufacture.
There was something else that Jesse Marcel Jr. remembers seeing on the debris his father showed him.
There was some writing along the inside edge of this. And I thought, what in the world is this? So I paid a little closer attention to that. I thought at first, well, hey, this is Egyptian hieroglyphics. But then again, no, this is not Egyptian hieroglyphics. This is more like mathematical or geometrical symbols.
It wasn't long before other stories emerged about what the Air Force may have found and retrieved from the debris site.
General Arthur Exon, he was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, said he knew about the debris coming in, and he also said he heard about bodies being recovered.
Flying saucers and spacemen are a part of our popular culture, and many believe they do exist. Others, more skeptical, aren't quick to agree.
The least likely explanation is that an extraterrestrial craft crashed on the planet Earth from some advanced civilization and left little cute humanoid bodies looking like an advanced futuristic form of us, just as our science fiction writers had described them.
Was there further evidence among the crash pointing toward a UFO and aliens? Find out when Best Evidence continues. (1947) Roswell, New Mexico. Strange-looking debris is found by rancher Mac Brazel.
Something crashed on the Brazel Ranch. It clearly doesn't describe to any reasonable person any kind of extraterrestrial craft. This has hoax written all over it.
Joe Nickel is one of the few professional paranormal investigators in the world.
Roswell is a vast and proliferating American myth.
Extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence.
Roswell skeptics claim there's no physical evidence supporting a UFO crash.
The scientific community really isn't going to be convinced that aliens have been visiting Earth without some cold, hard evidence. There aren't any known alien visitors.
Physicist Dave Thomas says that if aliens visited Earth, there would be indisputable physical proof. Photographic evidence of the crash debris appears to show only pieces of balloons and radar reflectors.
So far, the evidence of UFOs has been unextraordinary. It's been fuzzy photos and fuzzy memories. There are legends that have come out since then that the paper couldn't be burned or folded by any means. But if you look at the original witness descriptions, the rancher, Mac Brazel's daughter, Bessie Brazel, got to see this stuff. And she even described some rings that were part of the rigging for these complex balloons.
We want to look at the best evidence that we have, which means look at the original source, and we have that account by Mac Brazel. And based on Mac Brazel's statement, it doesn't appear to be any kind of extraterrestrial craft, unless, of course, extraterrestrials have invented tape and rubber and string and sticks and tinfoil.
What we think crashed at Roswell was part of a project called Project Mogul.
Mogul was a project using high-altitude listening devices suspended from weather balloons. It included a sonar system and radar tracking technology that could potentially detect nuclear tests being performed in the Soviet Union. Was this the debris found on the ranch? Kendrick Fraser believes it is.
I still think the idea of a crashed disk or a crashed flying saucer is an extraordinary claim.
Many experimental launches involving weather balloons were sent out from Alamogordo, another military installation in New Mexico. Prevailing winds carried many of them toward the northeast, in the very direction of the Roswell base and the Brazel Ranch.
That is very likely what was found on the Brazel Ranch by Mac Brazel. This was the beginning of the Cold War. The Soviet Union was now our declared enemy, and they were developing nuclear weapons. We had nuclear weapons, but we didn't want them to, and we wanted to find out if they were exploding them in tests.
And so was born Project Mogul, a weather balloon-propelled experiment designed to measure sound waves in the upper atmosphere.
Well, certainly the Mogul project itself was highly classified, and the military did not want anybody reporting, oh, we're trying to get microphones to spy on Soviet atomic tests.
If the crash debris came from a secret military spy operation, how did the skeptics explain the strange hieroglyphic markings across some of the debris?
There was a toy company in Manhattan called Merrick Manufacturing, and on the side they manufactured these radar reflectors for the Army Signal Corps. The toy company evidently had some reinforcing tape that had these strange sort of hieroglyphic symbols on them. And I think when Marcel saw the strange alien markings and this unusual sort of metallic paper that was resistant to folding, I think that convinced Marcel that he'd found something that was not of this earth.
Many believers maintained that Roswell involved two cover-ups: replacing the spaceship debris and concealing the corpses of its occupants. Rumors have circulated for decades that there was more than just debris. There were alien bodies. According to Roswell believers, the first stop was the now famous Hangar 84.
This is where the action was. The bodies were brought here. They were kept here, probably with some dry ice.
If there are ghosts of Roswell, this abandoned building is their home.
Matter of fact, I would expect the bodies are still around somewhere. You want to run tests on them. Lots and lots of tests.
The alien body theory has its roots in a story told by local mortician Glenn Dennis.
There's a military protocol for handling bodies.
Years after the Roswell incident, Glenn Dennis came forward, claiming he got a call from the military base inquiring about small caskets and how to deal with bodies decomposed by the desert sun.
He asked, was there a crash? They said, well, these are hypothetical questions. And he gets inside and sees a nurse that he knows. And she told him, you ought to get out of here. They're going to give you a hard time, etc. The officer that was there threatens him. And he says, well, you can't threaten me. I'm a civilian. And then the officer has him escorted back to the Ballard funeral home.
Glenn then claims he ran into his nurse friend the next day, and she was shaken, telling him of her involvement in an alien autopsy.
she made a drawing, described the beings. The relative lengths of the arm were different, for example, from us, and 4 fingers. Skinny little guys with big heads.
The skeptics have a different interpretation. In roughly the same period, a military aircraft crashed near Roswell, killing all aboard.
The airplane explosion burned several crew members so badly that their parts of their faces were gone, their bowels were hanging out. It smelled terrible.
Records indicate Glenn Dennis acted as mortician for the deceased crew.
We think that the nurse, when she drew pictures, she was actually drawing pictures of these burned, shrunk, emaciated bodies. And yeah, they kind of look like aliens, but they also look like what happens when you get burned up in a jet fuel explosion.
Glenn Dennis is one of those who tells different versions of things and quote-unquote remembers things, and as people ask him questions and come back and he's read in more conspiracy theories and heard and talked back and forth with people, he gets confused about the facts. And in fact, we didn't have any indication even at the time of extraterrestrial bodies. All of that stuff shows up decades later.
Spy balloons and government cover-ups, or aliens and their spacecraft?
I made no error in calculus.
Which side is closer to the truth?
I think there was initially an absence of malice, and then, once you start telling a lie, it gets harder and harder to not tell the lie.
I think we do now know reasonably certainly what happened at Roswell. That thing that crashed was a secret United States government spy balloon. I've already said too much.
Our team of experts is preparing an experiment which could resolve this controversy once and for all. And believers and skeptics go head-to-head in pursuit of the best evidence. Eyewitnesses, accusations of tampering with physical evidence, and an alleged government cover-up lead some people to conclude that a flying saucer crashed outside the small town of Roswell, New Mexico.
Now it's our turn.
And the fact that it was covered up and has been continued to be covered up for nearly 60 years indicates that there's some very deep, perhaps very dark secret that's involved here.
What I think really happened at Roswell, something did crash there, but it didn't come from outer space.
It's speculated that the crash occurred a week or two earlier, possibly during a storm. Was what fell to Earth at Roswell man-made or alien? Skeptics and believers now go head-to-head as they present their best evidence. On July 8, 1947, the Roswell incident made headline news in America when military sources informed the media that a spaceship had crashed on a ranch run by Mac Brazel. The official story changed when the debris was flown from Roswell Army Air Force Base to another base at Fort Worth, Texas. These photographs show what appears to be ordinary weather balloons.
Why did they switch the materials? Because they didn't dare show the real materials.
Well, I think it would have been a very simple process to switch the material.
My main response to the question, was the debris switched, involves the weatherman, Irving Newton.
Irving Newton was the meteorologist responsible for identifying the weather balloon. Fort Worth Base Commander General Roger Ramey called Newton to the base immediately.
I went over there and I opened the door to the general's office, and there they had a whole bunch of stuff laying on the floor of the office. And I says, now, is that your flying saucer? And they said, well, yes, it is. And I said, well, I'm sorry. I said, that's a bunch of horse bucky. That's a weather balloon.
He did as he was instructed. If the general said it was a radar reflector weather balloon combination, that was good enough for him. He didn't get a look at the real wreckage. He was an instrument of deception.
Meteorologist Irving Newton wasn't the only one to see the debris. Rancher Mac Brazel and Major Jesse Marcel were original eyewitnesses.
You have some descriptions by Mac Brazel in the local paper. You then see Jesse Marcel posing with some pieces of debris in a room that looks exactly consistent with what Mac Brazel said. Foiled paper, sticks, you can match it up. It looks very similar.
Although the description matches, believers still feel that other things don't.
And the radar target, if you look at it closely as I have, it adds up to exactly one radar target. If you look at the back side of it, the white paper backing, it's totally clean. There are no scrape marks, there's no mud, there's no dirt, there's no water stains on it. So it looks to me there's no string attached to it, which it should have been if it had actually been recovered in the field. It looks to me this is a brand new radar target. They took it out of a box, they broke it up, threw it on the floor.
I'm convinced that what was photographed in General Ramey's office in Texas was not the real wreckage.
Now, someone is trying to say, well, that's a bunch of crap, that really they substitute something. I cannot say that positively 100% they didn't.
After more than 6 decades, the eyewitness accounts remain one of the key pieces of evidence in the Roswell incident. Major Jesse Marcel was convinced that what he saw of the Roswell debris was something out of the ordinary.
My dad went to radar school, so he knew what a radar target looked like. And if it was that, he would never bothered picking it up off the desert. He just left it stay out there.
Major Marcel, basically his field of operations was assessment of bomb damage from photographs. He looked at photographs to see how much damage bombs had done to buildings. That was his expertise.
The skeptics claim that he never seen a weather balloon or radar target in his life, and how they determine that, I don't know, unless they've held seances with him, since he died.
We shouldn't engage, we shouldn't engage in the faulty logic of what's called an argument from ignorance, which is, I don't know what I saw, therefore, it's a flying saucer from Mars. No, if you don't know what you saw, you don't know what you saw.
I think Marcel, in the atmosphere of the flap of 47, he thought he'd found something really unusual. It wasn't his expertise. I think Marcel was out of his element.
Many years later, the military conducted an investigation into the Roswell incident.
We think that this answers lots of questions, and it answers them logically and with integrity.
The conclusion was that the debris came from a secret spy balloon project. Project Mogul was a spy balloon program designed to monitor suspected nuclear testing by the Soviets. It would carry a remote sonar system as well as several metallic reflectors to help ground radar track the balloons. Both believers and skeptics agree that there was a cover-up, but they disagree on what was being concealed.
So yeah, there was a cover-up, and I think there were probably good reasons for a cover-up, assuming this was really an alien spaceship crash. And I think one of the primary concerns would have been public panic.
The truth of the matter is that what crashed was basically identified, and it was not either of the two big things that people were concerned about. It was not extraterrestrial. It was not any threat to the planet Earth. The proof of the pudding is that the Roswell incident went away.
The reason for Mogul was super top secret, but the equipment, which is what we're talking about here, had no security classification at all. It was just off-the-shelf stuff. They lost half of the Mogul arrays that they launched and could care less. They didn't even go after one that went down 15 miles away from them.
Believers and skeptics disagree over nearly every aspect of the Roswell incident. One factor stands out above all the rest. Could the balloon and radar reflector wreckage from a Project Mogul ever match the strange and enormous debris field described by Major Jesse Marcel? Crash test engineer Robert Galgansky has always had an interest in these detailed aspects of the Roswell incident.
I just became fascinated with the debris field. The reason I really developed an intense interest in this particular aspect of the story was because there was something tangible that I could work with. There were dimensions given for this field. There were description given of the debris that was recovered, and I felt that I could do something with this from a quantitative standpoint. No one had tried doing that before.
For the first time ever, an experiment will put this critical factor to the test as we prepare to launch our best evidence. Eyewitness accounts, accusations of tampering with evidence, and talk of a government cover-up. They're all part of the Roswell flying saucer legend. Official reports still maintain that the debris came from a secret spy balloon project known as Project Mogul. One Mogul project was roughly 450 feet long, containing around 24 weather balloons. It had 3 metallic reflectors so that it could be tracked by radar. Project Mogul was created to lift sensitive listening devices to extremely high altitudes. The goal was to detect distant Soviet nuclear tests. The balloon arrays were disposable. They weren't expected to be recovered. Using a model half the length of the original, Best Evidence will now crash a Mogul project in an attempt to create a debris field. At this scale, it will be easier to control. Our array will be 225 feet long when fully extended. The goal of our experiment is to launch our Mogul replica, then cause it to crash and compare the size of our debris field with the eyewitness record. Like all the materials used, our radar reflectors are exact replicas of those used by the Air Force in the 1940s. We've selected California's Mojave Desert and a secure aviation test site for the launch. Computer-generated graphics have been created to visualize the experiment. Peter Chesney is a Hollywood special effects engineer. He'll coordinate the Mogul balloon assembly and test.
This gives us a sense of sort of what we're dealing with. What are the sort of logistical issues of what we might play with? You know, how this stuff, you know, should it be rigged that way or, you know, along the load line itself?
Best Evidence invited Roswell skeptic Joe Nickel and Roswell believer Robert Galgansky to observe the test for historical accuracy.
How are you proposing to bring the train down?
Oh, we've got a couple ideas. We've got a pellet gun we're going to try.
Kyle, don't miss.
Don't worry.
Yeah, it's microwire. I think it's
filament on the balloon. There we go. That's not going anywhere. All right, let's plug it in. Never heard of that. So we're ready to pop this thing.
All right, you got the voltage right?
It's all set.
Okay, good.
Here we go. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Okay, looks like pellet rifle works. Hot wire works as a good backup. Next, we're going to wind up about 400 feet on our temporary reel. We got a little leverage on the handle, and we're about ready to head out of Dodge.
The night before the experiment, our Best Evidence team wants to make sure that the Mogul balloon train can be assembled as planned.
Find it.
To do this, they need a controlled environment.
Hold it there, Pete.
An aircraft hangar fits the bill nicely.
So on the day, you can get a sense of how we're gonna line up. So you can pray to the wind gods that they behave for the morning. So we'll just drive it around once and we can see what it does.
To test for wind resistance, 2 balloons are towed at a controlled speed around the inside of the hangar. The buoyancy must be precise. A miscalculation, and all the balloons and reflectors could break free and threaten aircraft in the vicinity.
There we go. 7.5. No, 4.2. Okay, let her go. Just see how it's hanging. Is that a good distance between target?
Okay.
This is 2 pounds. No, wait, we have a buoyancy surplus on this. You know, we have an 11-to-1 buoyancy surplus.
We're going to take the balloon, we're going to launch it, and we're going to start shooting down the balloons with an air rifle, and eventually it's just going to come down in a heap.
We're feeling like we're just about ready to roll out the hangar and get on out. As long as we beat the afternoon breeze, we had a good chance of, you know, playing out the experiment. So the sooner we get out there, the better, before we start shredding latex all over the landscape.
And right now we have totally still conditions, which is really good balloon flying.
Our best evidence crew is pleased with the calm weather. Too much wind during the test could blow away weeks of work.
Well, that's a balloon. I thought that was... I'm going to let this go straight up now.
Filling 12 weather balloons with helium is a time-consuming process.
We're halfway there once we put this balloon on. You have plenty of time for the wind to come up and make a big spaghetti mess out of it. Okay, so here you go. It's on the load line.
Number 12.
Lucky number 12. Say when, Pete.
Keep going.
Keep going.
Gotta get this parachute off the ground.
With the balloon array completed, radar reflectors and a parachute are attached. And lastly, a replica of Mogul's sonar system.
What do you think, Bob?
It looks good. I like it. Mogul is launched. Yes, sir. Yeah.
The first ever replicated Mogul balloon train rises as expected. The team's hard work and attention to the smallest details pays off. It's taken many hours to assemble and launch Mogul, but now it's time to shoot it down and create a debris field.
Ready? Go for it. Get underneath the load line and you can probably get 4 or 5 in one pellet so it's not floating all the way down.
Take your shot. Okay.
Yeah.
Fourth from the top. Drifting on down.
4 for 3, Kyle. It's getting low.
All right. Oh, that one caught on the target. Got it. Okay, here we go. Last one. Here it comes. All over.
There's your debris field. Go get them.
Galgansky immediately notices how much loose rope there is, something not mentioned in historical accounts.
And you would think that the targets would have something on there. I mean, look, they're tied right here. Would you be able to pull this off without any evidence of any line at all? It seems highly unlikely, really. And
the skeptics aren't convinced or impressed by the experiment.
I fear that there may be a lot of hot air, and I'm not talking about the balloons.
How does the size of our debris field and the condition of the materials compare to the original reports? Skeptics and believers assess the result of our experiment as we continue our search for the best evidence. Skeptics of the Roswell spaceship crash maintain what happened in the summer of 1947 was nothing more than the debris of a long string of weather balloons, radar reflectors, and a sonar system, likely a secret spy mission, codenamed Project Mogul. The Best Evidence Experiment team has completed its own Mogul balloon crash at a desert test site, using a scaled-down model. One observer was certain of the outcome.
I think the results of this experiment will show to anybody with an open mind that Mogul did not have the volume of material to cause even the Roswell debris field, let alone what Marcel reported.
There was a wide range of predictions about the experiment before it began.
I don't know how it's going to turn out. I have no idea. And frankly, I think because the standard approach of the debunker is don't bother me with the facts, my mind's made up, that if it turns out that Galgansky is right on, isn't enough wreckage to account for what was seen. They will ignore that.
Jesse Marcel described the crash debris as being scattered over an area 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide. Our experimental debris field represented 12 balloons, roughly half of the original Mogul's size. Our debris field measured a diameter of 150 feet.
I think what this will prove is that any reasonable estimate of the amount of debris in any sort of Mogul crash doesn't amount to a whole lot.
You know, recreating it is going to be a shot in the dark. You know, if they can do it, wow. If they can't, I don't think it disproves the Mogul hypothesis.
I think that this kind of experiment is really predicated on too many assumptions. There's very little data.
This is typical of what you'd expect would happen. at all the line there. You would expect that, but the load line, you'd expect to see something. The odd thing about the Roswell debris field on Foster Ranch was that there was no line found at all, period. If you go over toward the radar targets, there's all the supporting lines. You can see the shroud lines from the parachute, but not a stitch on the debris field. And the Air Force didn't even show any in their pictures in 47.
What does this mean for the believers?
I think what it shows that there's no such thing as a balloon crash per se. It's a balloon landing. Okay, so there's nothing really spectacular that happens on the impact.
I think this experiment proves there was a Project Mogul, and this looks exactly like we thought it would look, and we've confirmed that Mogul consisted of these elements. The exact way the debris is scattered, of course, this is not like it would have been with something coming down in a storm and being ripped and shredded and distributed over a period of time.
No one is certain what may have caused a Project Mogul to crash. Often the sun would degrade the balloon material, causing it to burst. The discovered debris may have lain in the desert for up to 2 weeks, shredded and scattered by the wind. These are the uncertainties our experiment faced.
It's unrealistic to think that anything like this, made of mundane materials, could have been broken up and scattered to the extent that it would create something that would be construed as a debris field.
Who knows what that debris should exactly look like? We weren't there when it was being shredded, so the idea that we somehow know how a corner radar reflector will always look when it's been torn up is just folly.
12 weather balloons, 3 radar reflectors, a parachute, a sonobuoy microphone package, and hundreds of feet of nylon line. Now just piles of debris lying in a field. This experiment has only served to divide the two camps further.
The importance here is the way the components landed and what happened to them immediately afterward. In other words, they weren't smashed to smithereens. It doesn't look like they were torn apart. And again, the most important thing to me is the fact that there's no cord, there's no load line, there's no monofilament line used to suspend the targets, to suspend the balloons from the load line. This is not there in the Roswell pictures.
The arguments and evidence put forth by believers and skeptics hang on more than balloons and foil reflectors. Stories of threats, gag orders, and a strange piece of film. Next on Best Evidence. Tales of extraterrestrial beings occupying the solar system and worlds beyond got a boost in 1947 with the rumored crash of a flying saucer disc near Roswell, New Mexico.
If you go back to the papers, it was the story of the day for weeks and weeks. And it created an environment in which people were expecting strange and unusual stuff to fall out of the sky.
Our experiment set out to replicate the crash debris of a balloon train known as Project Mogul. For believers, it confirmed that Mogul alone couldn't explain the amount of debris recovered in 1947. In fact, for Robert Galgansky, it confirms that a Mogul balloon crash couldn't be mistaken for a UFO.
There were actually a number of targets that went down throughout the United States around the same time, and the local papers show pictures of them, and they look just like that. Okay, they're not broken up, they're pretty much intact. Somebody will find part of a balloon, maybe the neck and a little bit of the carcass, and that's what you have right here.
For the skeptics, the results were inconclusive.
What's happening is that the proponents have started with the answer they want, and they're looking over all the stuff, and they're saying, yeah, we can say this about that.
Several questions remain about the Roswell incident. Was there a conspiracy to conceal other information? The believers question why some key eyewitnesses were threatened into silence. Was it part of a government cover-up? Jesse Marcel Jr. recalls the night his father returned home from the Roswell Air Base, where the debris was first stored.
He sat my mother and myself down and said, "Don't ever talk about this again. This is so highly classified that nothing was to be said about this."
The rancher, Mac Brazel, was also allegedly threatened. After finding the debris, he gave interviews describing what he had witnessed.
They held him at the base for about a week, and said they'd thrown him in jail and he'd been forced to take a security oath not to talk about what had happened.
Some claim that following his release from the military base, Brazel's story changed dramatically. Radio announcer Frank Joyce recalls that day.
He says, I was told to come here and tell you this story about the weather balloon, and if I didn't do it, it would go hard with you and with me.
Why would the military use threats if the recovered crash debris was simply weather balloons? Skeptics dismiss these stories as flights of fancy on the part of Roswell believers.
A supposedly secret government group that exists to keep from the American public the awful, fearful secret that extraterrestrials have crashed on the planet Earth. These pickled humanoids are kept at some secret facility.
And it's all a big hoax.
The most audacious Roswell account happened years after the event. In 1995, a film emerged claiming to be an official military record of an alien autopsy. The footage is later revealed by its creators to be a hoax. It was shot by amateurs in Great Britain, proof positive that Roswell had graduated to the world stage of pop culture. This little New Mexican town continues to hold its place in the spotlight.
The reason I think it hasn't gone away is because something really did happen, that was far more than just a balloon crash. I think if there hadn't been any substance to this, even the ufologists would have given up on it a long time ago.
To my mind, the discovery of anything involving an extraterrestrial spacecraft would be the most wonderful, most positive, most incredible scientific discovery in human history. As a science journalist, I would just hop all over that story if I thought there was any reality to it whatsoever.
We've got people pretty much entrenched now in their positions, and one group is saying, we started with the evidence and we saw where it led, and it led to Project Mogul. And the other group is saying, we want very much to believe in flying saucers and we're not giving it up. And are those two groups ever going to be reconciled? Probably not in my lifetime.
Nobody knows what eventually happened to the famous Roswell debris. Skeptics say it was probably disposed of years ago. Believers think it's still under wraps somewhere. Roswell's best evidence remains elusive. Whether a UFO crash is fact or fiction seems irrelevant in the public eye. What sustains the Roswell incident is a common human trait, our desire to believe that we're not alone in the universe. Usual wreckage. He didn't think much of it, but when he heard stories of UFO sightings, he decided to report it to the authorities. The Roswell Army Air Base sent out its top intelligence officer. Major Jesse Marcel was attached to an elite unit, the 509th, the world's first nuclear bomber squadron.
What makes the Roswell story so different for me than other UFO stories is that I saw it. I saw it firsthand.
Jesse Marcel Jr. remembers the night his father woke him up to see something he claimed was out of this world.
When he came home that night and he woke myself and my mother up to come and look and see what he found, or at least what he retrieved from a crash site on this ranch out of Roswell. He said, I think it's part of a flying saucer. I looked very carefully at this because you probably will never see this again. And he was right.
The crash debris was described as containing
He said that they had found a flying saucer. That's a bunch of horse bucky. That's a weather balloon.
Washington said, cover this up.
Don't ever talk about this again.
What did crash at Roswell ultimately was the truth.
Eyewitnesses, believers, skeptics, and a top-secret military operation recreated in a first-ever experiment.
We know an alien flying saucer was recovered. There were bodies found. There was a major cover-up.
What really happened outside Roswell, New Mexico? Find out as we examine the best evidence. Today, the Roswell incident lives on in the public imagination. But it began as America was coming of age in a frightening new era. It was the aftermath of World War II and a period of heightened fear of invasion. Powerful weapons could wipe away cities in a single devastating moment. 1947 was the year the CIA was formed. Americans everywhere feared Russian sympathizers and infiltrators.
Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
It was the beginning of the Cold War, and spying on the enemy became an essential tactic. Coincidentally, throughout the late 1940s, there were also many sightings of what came to be referred to as flying saucers.
It's falling! It's falling towards the earth!
And so the stage was set for a small American town to become the touchstone for a UFO conspiracy. It was while working on a farm outside Roswell that rancher Mac Brazel discovered some unusual materials. It was removed by the Air Force.
The military press release stated that through the cooperation of a rancher outside town, the Roswell Army Airfield had recovered the wreckage of a flying saucer. So it was headline news.
Stanton Friedman is a former nuclear physicist who has spent many years researching the Roswell incident.
Look at the evidence and you'll be convinced. There's no question in my mind that there's been a cover-up of the Roswell incident, an official government-sponsored cover-up, if you want to put it that way.
Within hours of releasing the UFO story, the military withdrew it, stating it was only a crashed weather balloon. Scientists have been using latex balloons since they were first developed in 1940. Weather balloons carry disposable instruments that take atmospheric measurements and relay the information back to Earth by radio.
Sorry, gentlemen, we made a mistake.
Roswell, New Mexico. For many people, the name is synonymous with a crashed flying saucer and an unusual government cover-up. 6 decades after the mysterious event, eyewitnesses continue to stick to their stories.
I do think it was a craft of some kind. It was not of human manufacture. Where it came from, I don't know, but I do know it did not come from Earth.
What fell out of the sky that summer is still shrouded in mystery.
Whatever it was that they really found so unsettled them that there seems to have been a panic.
This much is clear. The quiet New Mexican town was changed forever when on July 8, 1947, word of a flying saucer crash hit the news. But in only 4 hours, the story was suddenly recanted. What shocked the public almost more than the initial announcement was it now was being denied by the same official sources who'd released it in the first place.